Well, good morning, everybody. These very, very wonderful people allowed me to come to their house in Tyre, Lebanon. That's where I am right now. Okay, so I'm going to read here in their sitting room, and I'll read the story that we've been reading, The Hittite Warrior. This is chapter 3. We know that the chapter 1 was brutal, and poor Uriah lost his entire family. We know that in chapter 2, he was very poor and hungry, and he joined a caravan. Well, he saved Hannibal ben Ethball's life, and now that rich merchant from Tyre in Lebanon today, but what was considered Canaan in the ancient world. Okay, so let's take a look at chapter 3, the house of Ethball. The caravan followed the great king's highway into Canaan by way of Damascus into a land of many hills and valleys and rocks, swift streams and awesome forests, and a great snow-capped range of mountains towering over all. Many people seemed to live there, for the road was crowded at times, especially as we moved farther south. There were fields and villages and towns all along the way. Having stopped for some light trading at the bustling town of Damascus, we turned westward toward the sea. The land was smoother there, and it was not long before we passed the high gleaming wall of Canaan's great city of Sidon. And for the first time in my life, I smelled salt in the air and heard in the distance the sound of surf rolling in on the shore. And then soon after, we came to Tyre. The town of Tyre was on an island approached by a narrow causeway from the beach. To come to the causeway, we had to pass through a tangle of miserable hovels of brick and mud huddled about the shore. Never before, even in the worst villages at home, had I seen such dirt and smelled such smells. The huts were so crowded together that I wondered that the people who lived in them had room to breathe, much less move. But then we came upon the causeway, and all the great sea was around us. And before us, the golden towered wall of the city with its well-guarded gate. Soldiers watched us as we passed through. They seemed to be of two different kinds, and one kind I had never seen before. They were slim, very dark, and clean-shaven, and wore nothing, it seemed, but brightly patterned kilts belted about their waists. "What sort of man is that?" I asked the donkey boy. "They are Egyptian soldiers from the garrison," said the boy indifferently. "They help our temple guards keep order and see that the city pays its taxes to Egypt." I made the sign against evil. This was the first Egyptian soldier I had ever seen. Never had I seen so many people crowded together as within the walls of Tyre. People thronged about the outdoor shops set up in the streets of the bakers, jewelers, vegetable sellers, and the rest. Street musicians hung about playing their instruments and looking for silver. Some of the streets were little more than alleys, and it was hard to push your way through them. There were few horses and chariots about, but many donkeys and sedan chairs and simple carts. In the middle of all this, we came upon an open place in which was a building surrounded by a courtyard. "Is this the temple of Malkarth?" I asked the donkey boy. For Malkarth was a Baal. A Baal is Baal. It's like a patron god. It's a god of a certain area. Or patron god of Tyre. The donkey boy shook his head and, to my surprise, shuddered a little. "No," he said. "This is the temple of Malak." I want you to remember that one. "This is the temple of Malak." And he shuddered again, with a cringing reverence in the direction of the building. He said no more about it. A strange, cold feeling had come over me as I looked at it. and I did not know why, for the building itself was not ugly. Hannibal had told the donkey boy to guide me to his father's house. He had given me a letter for his father, written on a tablet of clay to explain my arrival, for he himself had first to go to his father's warehouse. I looked with scorn at the marks on the tablet. Remember how he doesn't like the writing. He doesn't like scribes. He doesn't, remember, Uriah is pure warrior, and that's what he thinks is important. The house of Ethball was made of brick and wood and was 3 stories high with a beautifully columned door. A servant took my letter, leaving me to stand in amazement in the entryway, gazing upon the splendor of bright tiles and ornaments and beautiful rugs. Though the furnishings were few and simple, this was surely a great house of the city. The servant returned with a message of welcome, and as I was hot and dirty, I was shown to a room at the top of the house, in which was a shallow tub and another servant to pour hot water upon me. This gave me great pleasure, and the scrubbing I gave myself with soda powder set my blood to racing, so that when it was time for the evening meal, I found that I was ready to face these strangers unafraid. Ethball himself met me when I came into the common room from washing myself. Now, Ethball is Hannibal ben Ethball's father. All right, remember Hannibal ben Ethball was the merchant boy that Uriah saved his life. And now he's meeting his father. He was a small, elderly man, very thin, and seeming never to be at rest. His hair was gray, and he had a stringy beard, too thin to be held in a net, as were the beards of many of the Canaanite men. But his eyes were sharp and kind, and he was resolved to make me welcome for his son's sake. "The young Hittite," he said. "There are many of you about now, fine young men with fair skins and good strong noses. You will make your way in Canaan, all of you. I must embrace you, for now you are as a son of the family." And he did so, then led me to where the others waited. Now, I do want you to pay attention to all these characters. They're very important in the story. And so far, we met Ethball, Hannibal ben Ethball's father. And he's going to introduce Uriah to the other people in the family. "My mother," he said with great respect, "the Lady Maris, whose youngest and only living son I am. She is the woman of the house, for my wives are dead." So Ethball had more than one wife. He had many wives, and they have all perished. They're all dead. I bowed to the Lady Maris, who was very old and wrinkled and dressed with great richness, a mantle covering her white hair and heavy gold ornaments hiding her fingers and hanging from her ears. She leaned on the arm of a young girl who also wore gold rings and earrings and a golden headband. She was called Mehitabel and was the old lady's granddaughter, the youngest child of Ethball. A young man stood behind her in the shadows, watching me angrily with large dark eyes. I thought at first that he was another of Ethball's sons, but Ethball called him his kinsman. And I saw that his eyes were just as angry when he looked at the others. He did not speak to me. His name was Jotham, and Ethball said that he came from the south of Canaan, somewhere near Jerusalem, the town of the Jesuits, or Jebusites. "My son is kept late in the warehouse," said Ethball, "but you are hungry, and we will not wait for him." We seated ourselves on small Egyptian rugs about a low table, and Ethball invoked the blessings of Adonai the Lord and El, the Almighty, all the Baals in general, and Baal Melkarth, patron of Tyre in particular, upon our meal. It was a fine meal with roast pigeon, artichokes, and strange tempting cakes. There was wine too, though the mother of Ethball drank beer instead. Ethball explained to me that this was because she had come from Egypt, where beer was the favorite drink. So the mother of Ethball too was an Egyptian. I looked at her with uneasy eyes. Remember how he feels about Egyptians. Ethball leaned toward me and spoke in a low voice. The family of my mother once lived in Akatetan, the accursed city. Her father's father was brought up as a child near the court of the criminal Pharaoh, and her grandmother could remember his brother, the young Tutankhamun. So they're talking about King Tut. King Tut is young Tutankhamun, and the Pharaoh is the god king of Egypt. I did not know what he was talking about. I knew nothing of any Egyptians except the wicked Ramses who had fought us at Kadesh. And the very thought of that great and hated land was a dark and awesome mystery. The mother of Ethball had raised her head, and I could see how bright her eyes were among the dark wrinkles of her face. He was no criminal, she said in her old whispering voice. He was the true Pharaoh, the Pharaoh and beautiful child of Adoni. There are no true pharaohs on the throne of Egypt now. There was an embarrassed silence. Then the young girl called Mehitabel spoke briskly. My grandmother's very old, she said, and can say what she likes. Her grandmother told her many stories of the accursed city. It is so long ago that most people have forgotten it, and we need not be ashamed. It smelled of flowers, said the old woman stubbornly. Now Ethball found his voice and changed the subject. Tell me of yourself, my son, he said to me. Hannibal says in his letter that your father was a man of property in Great Hatti. What did he raise on his land? Wheat, barley, I said. We had many orchards and kept bees, but mostly we raised horses on the grassland. I swallowed hard, for my throat had tightened with a longing for home. Ethball was impressed. Chariot horses, he asked eagerly. War horses, the finest, I replied, remembering Labernash. If that could be done here, cried Ethball, raising his hands. But this poor land is mostly for orchards and sheep. Still, we do a good business from the wool. Show him, Mehitabel. The girl Mehitabel rose with pride and came for me to touch the cloth on her robe. It was finer and softer than any material I had felt before. That's actually a big deal in the ancient world. Cloth that they made clothing out of, wool and different materials, were a big deal. People, they really needed and wanted that softer material. And that was a huge deal back then. It was very hard to get, and you had to be very wealthy in order to get clothes like that. From our workshops, said Ethball, the finest. You see that it is bordered in the Canaanite purple. Only here can the purple dye be made. That's a big deal too, the purple. We'll talk about that. She jingles when she walks, said Jotham scornfully. Remember the angry boy? And it was true, for there were silver ornaments at her wrists and ankles, but Mehitabel only smiled at him. It was the first time he had spoken. He seemed a strange young man, but everything in this house was strange to me. I was pleased to hear Hannibal's voice in the entryway, for he at last was not a stranger. I saw him through the door giving his walking stick to a servant and having his hands and feet washed. He greeted me happily after having embraced Ethball and bowed to the grandmother, and I could not help being warmed by his sweet smile and gracious manner. Ethball was overjoyed to see him, and I could see that he was the pride of his heart. He is all that is left to me, he said. This is Ethball saying that. There were 4 other sons, one who might almost have been a grandfather himself now if he had married young, but he was the firstborn. Remember that. He was the firstborn. Here he stopped, and an uncomfortable silence fell upon us. I did not understand what the trouble was, but for some reason I felt the same cold feeling that had come upon me once before that day near the temple of Malak. But Ethball did not say what had become of his firstborn son. There's the mystery. What happened to Ethball's firstborn son? What is the temple of Malak? 2 others were lost at sea, he continued, and another of plague, like my wives. Hannibal is all that is left, but he will bring me honors, I have no doubt. So his other sons died at sea, and the plague, another one like his wives, died of the plague, which is a disease. He was silent for a moment. Then, as if shaking off some deep sadness, he turned to me, saying briskly, "And you, my son, what are your plans in Canaan? Are you a good man of business? Can you keep accounts?" They were all smiling at me in encouragement, and I felt my face grow hot. Remember, he can't read. "I cannot read," I said at last. There was a shocked silence, and I began to frown. Bookkeepers, traders, I thought angrily. Who but low-caste priests and servant scribes could read or write? High-born Hittites had better things to do than spend their lives over 1,000 signs and pictures and learn to make marks in clay. But Hannibal was smiling again. "Here in Canaan," he said, "it is necessary for a man of position to read and write. It is not as it is in Great Hatti, where the sacred picture writing is a mystery in itself. Here we have an easy way, only 22 signs, from which all words may be formed. You will learn quickly." So in writing, the Hittite writing was way more complicated, and the Canaanite writing was more similar to the alphabet that we're familiar to, a little more similar. "I do not care to learn," I said rudely. "I am not a scribe." The young man Jotham snorted, but the others were patient with me still, explaining that in the coastal trading cities, a man who could read and write and keep accounts could rise to great wealth and power. See, it was true then, and it's true now. More education, more wealth. "There is work you could do for me here in Tyre," said Ethball. "But I am going to Harosheth," I answered. "You cannot go there for a while," said Hannibal. "There will be few caravans, for they say there is trouble again in the hills. You will have time to learn many things here." And his face alight, he talked for a long time of the wonders of the business and his father's possessions. Farms where sheep were raised, workshops where cloths were woven, ships to carry the produce to the far corners of the world, and a copper smithy. Ethball listened to all this, nodding his approval, and I wondered if Hannibal would talk on through the night. At last, however, his father stopped him, saying that it was late and that prudent men did not waste oil for their lamps, and that it was time for prayers and offerings before bed. And now a thing happened that surprised me more than anything I had yet seen. At the mention of prayers, Jotham rose from his rug and walked from the room. The hair rose on the back of my neck, for I thought no man in his right mind would refuse to honor the gods. Though the gods had not protected me, I still feared them. In the ancient world, when they had polytheism, with the worship of many gods, or paganism, they feared the gods. They were always scared bad things would happen if they didn't. It was more like a superstition in a way. If they didn't pray to them, they thought bad, awful things were going to happen. So Uriah, when he saw Jotham get up, he's like, "Oh no, how could you do that? The gods will strike you down." Ethball saw my look of horror and said to me, "Jotham must be forgiven. He has suffered greatly, and a man whose birthright has been stolen must always be bitter. And he added under his breath, those scoundrels down in Gaza. So more mystery. We want to find out what happened to Jotham. How did he get his birthright stolen? We said our prayers and made our offerings of incense before the household images and a little gold statue of Astarte, the sacred mother. Then, as the lamps were burning low, we went to bed. I found that I must share a room with Jotham. I decided that sooner or later I must speak to him. I did not know what to say, for though he seemed to be a Canaanite lord, there was something different about him. Tyre is a fine city, I said at last, out of politeness. It is a den of evil, replied Jotham. I decided to try again. The people, I said, are very kind to strangers. Jotham laughed. Ask the strangers who make their purple dye how kind they are. More about the purple dye. But, I said, how is it that you, who are one of them, should speak like that? To my amazement, he gave me such a savage look that I stepped back away from him. I am not one of them, he said. After this, he would not speak at all, and after a while he slept, leaving me to listen to the shouts of quarrelsome voices and the rattle of cartwheels outside, and to dream of the silent plains of Arzawa, where he's from. All right, so we just got our view of some more characters. I want you to keep those in your mind. Ethball, of course, we know Hannibal, but now we know Ethball, and we know the Lady Maris, Jotham, and Mehitabel. All right, so keep those down. If you have to write their names down, write them down, because we're going to be talking about them, thinking about them, and reading more about them. This book has more characters, and there's more story, understanding where the grandmother is from in Egypt and what was going on there, understanding the Canaanites, and understand the difference between the coastal towns in Canaan and the inland or hill towns of Canaan. Understand the sea people who have attacked Great Hatti. A lot of stuff going on. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next time. Have a great afternoon and evening, whatever time it is in your world. All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.